Hello, I'm Cris Hardaway. Welcome to this edition of The Best Times, a series that looks at life after 50. The National Center on Elder Abuse estimates that between 1 and 2 million older adults, nearly 10% of the elderly population, suffer some form of elder abuse each year. And that's just an educated guess because only 1 out of 23 cases are actually reported. Elder abuse is largely an invisible crime. Too often victims remain silent, and too often they and their relatives feel that no one is there to help them. For the past 2 years, a Plough Foundation grant has funded the Coordinated Response to Elder Abuse Team, or CREA. Tonight we examine the work that CREA has done and the work that remains in fighting elder abuse. On a Wednesday morning, a large group of professionals gather for a training session. These individuals and the diverse agencies they represent are the Coordinated Response to Elder Abuse Team. CREA unites law enforcement agencies, healthcare organizations, and legal and victims services in one collaboration aimed at reducing the problem of elder abuse in our community, which can take the form of physical, financial, emotional or sexual abuse, neglect, and even self-neglect. Bonnie Brandel, a nationally recognized expert in the area of elder abuse, is leading the training session. She knows how serious the problem is.
It's a very serious problem nationwide. As 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day for the next 16 years, the number of older adults in this country is expanding and exploding in ways that we have never, as a country, seen before.
The PowerPoint presentation gives way to a practical exercise as Bonnie leads the group in a real-life demonstration of the hard choices that victims of abuse often face. The pathway to help is available, but it can be difficult to navigate, and those who are there to help are often hindered by the fact that elder abuse can be difficult to identify and prove.
Elder abuse cases are extremely complicated, and often an older victim is touching a number of systems. Law enforcement may have been the first to come out and visit the home. They may have called Adult Protective Services. The older victim may be engaged with one or more healthcare providers. Maybe a civil attorney could be helpful in terms of getting a protective order. Maybe they need a place to stay and need emergency shelter and victim services. And so typically all of these different agencies have worked in their own silos and had their own case, and because of confidentiality or not even knowing what the other person is doing, they've worked very separately. And so what we found across the country is that collaboration in these cases can be hugely effective, both in looking at individual cases and having providers who are working on the same case come together and do case review with signed releases by the victim, so the victim knows that these conversations are happening and that one case plan can come together for that older adult and one care coordinator is working with that older victim. And that's part of the CREA model that I think is particularly strong and we're seeing effective across the country.
In 2016, CREA served 283 new clients, a 52% increase over the prior year. 2/3 of CREA's clients were female, with a slight majority being African American. The ages served ranged from 60 to 99, with over half under age 75. Abuse types closely matched the 2015 numbers, except for a dramatic increase in self-neglect cases. In 2016, CREA was able to drastically increase the number of case closures, going from 1/3 of all cases in 2015 to approximately 60% in 2016. One case that CREA closed is that of Bernice and Eddie Love. Bernice and Eddie are soulmates. Listen to what their daughter says about them.
Have you ever seen the movie The Notebook? Because my dad and stepmom are the African-American versions of The Notebook. They literally are. And their interaction is what gives them a better quality of life.
Bernice and Eddie are both 86 years old. Bernice has Alzheimer's. Eddie's mind is sharp, but his eyes are failing him. So certified nursing assistants care for them in their home on a daily basis, and a local family member tends to their finances. One day, Carolyn, who lives 500 miles away in Indiana, received a disturbing phone call from their CNA. A letter had arrived notifying Bernice and Eddie of impending foreclosure proceedings against their home because of failure to pay their taxes.
And I was appalled when she read it, because my dad and I had had conversations many times before, and I would ask him, I said, Daddy, did you pay this? Did you pay that? Because, you know, this is due here and so forth. And he would say, oh yes, it's being taken care of. And I had no reason to doubt, so therefore I went along with it. Well, when now the CNA is reading this letter to me, I realized that none of that has indeed been taken care of.
Bernice and Eddie were victims of financial abuse and neglect, and the abuser was a family member.
It's unfortunate that anyone would do anything harmful to senior citizens because they are so vulnerable, and especially a senior citizen who's aged and visually impaired and someone close to you. And yet, I think a person may not be in his or her right mind or heart to do something like that. So we forgive them and we move forward, but we also take measures so that that does not reoccur.
Carolyn came to Memphis, and with the help of Belinda Bryan of the Family Safety Center, she was able to straighten out the tax situation and save her parents' home. Through the collaborative agencies of CREA, Carolyn was also able to get legal services to give her power of attorney and draft a written will for her parents. She also obtained additional health care services for her father, who now required a more extensive level of care. But even more importantly, CREA gave Carolyn peace of mind.
When I leave, I can leave with peace of mind, knowing that CREA and all of their extensive social services and medical attendants will be able to have my parents in a safe environment, that I can come and see them, I can lie down at night with rest and assurance, knowing that they're getting the best care that they can. And that makes me feel very, very comfortable and at peace.
This story of financial abuse and neglect by a family member is a very typical scenario that occurs all too often. Carolyn says we should all learn from her cautionary tale.
Whenever it happens, whether you are watching it on television that someone has been taken advantage of, or whether you are the recipient, it's still painful to know that people can be so harmful to others. And especially, as I say, it's like taking candy from a baby.
To find out more about the latest efforts in fighting elder abuse, I invited 4 guests into the studio. Major Tracy Burford is commander of the Domestic Violence Bureau of the Memphis Police Department. Amy Weirich is the Shelby County District Attorney General. Kay Norman is with Adult Protective Services. And Mark Norris is the Majority Leader in the Tennessee State Senate. We just had an opportunity to see in the video some of the latest data from CREA from 2016, as well as a story of financial abuse. But I'm curious to know from you who are out there, how do you feel CREA is working? Is it working? Are we making progress in this fight against elder abuse?
From a prosecutor standpoint, it is working. And what you heard in the video is why it's working. Instead of having 14 different agencies perhaps working on the same case and not knowing that that work is going on, everybody's at the table together. As a prosecutor, if you know your victim is safe and not continuing to live with the person who is physically or emotionally abusing them, that helps you do a better job in terms of building a case with law enforcement and bringing that case to prosecution so that we can seek justice.
Kay, are you seeing the same kind of progress from a social services standpoint?
Definitely. Prior to CREA, we had to go out and find services, find agencies that were providing the services that the client needs, and we no longer have to do that. So that has been very, very good for us and our clients.
Let's talk in general about elder abuse, because it is largely an underreported or unreported crime. Most common statistic I've seen is 1 out of 23 cases gets reported. Why is that? I mean, we're talking about, some of these are violent crimes. We're talking about violence against people, and if it's not physical violence, it's emotional and sometimes financial. Why is it so unreported? Do you have an explanation for that?
I think because most of your citizens probably see it and say, well, that's their business, and don't want to get involved. And by the time that we do, or it get reported, it's way into where it's critical. But people should know that if they see a crime, report it.
The biggest problem, I think, is for fear of everybody knowing, so you don't want anybody else to know that you've been a victim. The other part, too, is that usually that person that is the perpetrator is a family member and or a caretaker. So if that caretaker is gone, who's going to provide services to them? And most of the time, they will not tell on a caregiver or family members.
Fear of retaliation?
That and lack of care.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think
nobody
it's
is
the
going
same
to take care of them.
things that we see with domestic violence that's not our vulnerable population. It's fear, and it's that control that the abuser has over them. They keep the books, they write the checks, they pay the bills, they feed them, they get them to their doctor's appointments, to their social outings, whatever. It's that complete control that their abuser has.
Well, we're
over them.
talking about a population that is as vulnerable, really,
Sure.
as children.
Of course, which is why the law protects them, especially.
Yeah. Now, who are the perpetrators here? I mean, it's often family members, correct?
Family members, caretakers, even people in the care homes. Mainly they have access to either the elderly's financial situation or not really understanding if somebody is going through dementia on how they're acting. They are taking that as aggression and not the dementia, and then reacts upon that.
Tennessee is a mandatory reporting state, correct? If you suspect elder abuse, whether you are a relative, a friend, whoever you are, what should you do?
Call the police, call Adult Protective Services. The same responsibility you have if you suspect a child is being abused. It's your responsibility under the law. Even if you're just a cashier at the grocery store and you notice that every time Mrs. Johnson comes in with her son-in-law to do their weekly shopping, she's beaten and bruised and seems scared to death to make eye contact with anybody. If your gut's telling you something's not right, pick up the phone and call MPD, call sheriff, call APS.
And another part of it also is that with Adult Protective Services, the identity of the reporter is confidential and protected by law, so we will not tell who called.
I want to talk about the legislation that you have put through. We said the word vapid before, so maybe you should define what that is and what is the intent of the legislation that was put through. It was in 2016, correct?
Yes, so to enhance the opportunity for collaboration and communication and to legitimize, if you will, law enforcement's efforts as one. And with the encouragement and support of Plough Foundation here in West Tennessee, we had legislation to create these vulnerable adult protective investigatory teams. Not that folks in the DA's offices and police departments weren't doing this, but they were all sort of isolated in their efforts. and to be able to have in each judicial district a team, a strike force, if you will, that communicates and collaborates amongst itself and then across district lines was elegantly simple, but obviously missing. And so we gave it that structure and provided funding in the state budget for some basic training and brought folks together from all across the state last summer in Middle Tennessee for 3 days of intensive training. And these are all folks who already know their own jobs. They know how to do what they do. But to meet others who are doing the same thing and to learn how to collaborate and some of the best practices moved us significantly forward. Now we'll have to continue with funding as this goes forward. Some grants will be depleted soon, but it provided that basic foundation to build upon, and that's what we're doing.
How is VAPIT working out in the field?
It's working very well. So we stole a lot of what we have been doing for many, many years from the child protection universe. The CIPIT team here in Shelby County meets on a regular basis. And again, it's just a matter of putting everybody at the table. You know, I think everybody assumes because the Memphis Police Department and the DA's office and the Sheriff's office are all in the same building, we all work together every day. And that's not always true. So putting us there at the same table, reviewing the referrals that come in from APS, and making that decision. One of the cases they reviewed last week was somebody that has been to the emergency room 16 times this year already. And the most recent incident was because they were out wandering and got hit by a car. Well, the resolution is not always for us to run out and put handcuffs on somebody and indict somebody. There may be a very plausible explanation for why that's going on. But that's where we need APS and others that are at the table to help get that individual safe and secure, and then let the police department do what they do, which is investigate for a possible crime. But just having everybody there literally at a table like this, talking together and figuring out what's best for that particular senior citizen you can't put a price tag on it. It's a great tool for prosecutors and law enforcement, and most importantly for the community.
Now there's other legislation. Talk about the other legislation that came out of, I guess, a result of the General Assembly's Elder Abuse Task Force. What else is there on the books right now?
So in our most recent legislative session that adjourned in May, we had 3 additional pieces of legislation which I sponsored. Dealing with financial services industry, the securities industry, but overarching all those industries, the new Financial Exploitation Act that gives specific definition to what is financial exploitation. It enhances crimes against seniors. In other words, gives law enforcement a stronger tool, basically taking what would generally be known as theft, and if an elder or vulnerable adult is involved, making it a worse crime.
You know, you seem very passionate about this. I'm curious as to why. I know I read the article you did in the Commercial Appeal. You called this, I think, a silent crisis.
It is.
Why are you passionate about this?
Just bottom line, because it's the right thing to do. I've had some experience, personal experience, family members in our family who've witnessed this in the financial services industry, suspected that something was wrong, tried to find help, found it difficult to find help, ultimately did find help, and found that a crime had been committed and that this person's resources were being pilfered. So we've had some pretty close to home. I don't mean in my own family, but my loved ones who tried to help others. And we hope that this will facilitate that kind of help, simplify it, and find real solutions.
Do you have enough laws on the books to enforce? Do you have enough to prosecute?
I think we do. What is always helpful to us at the back end of things, you know, it takes the tough laws, it takes law enforcement being able to make a case, and then it takes good prosecutors being able to get convictions and get the results that the victims deserve. And sometimes when all of that works very well, we have the added frustration of this defendant might be eligible for probation, and a judge just might give them probation. Or they might go out to do a little bit of their sentence, but because of our sentencing laws, they're released a little too quickly for some of the most serious cases. And so perhaps tougher sentencing for some of the worst of the worst. What was added this year to help us tremendously was murder during the perpetration of aggravated vulnerable abuse. And that just came from prosecutors and law enforcement realizing we didn't really have a way to address a victim who was the victim of financial abuse and then who was just neglected. Nobody intended for grandmother to die, but they didn't do anything to keep her from dying either. And there was a hole in the law there. But again, thanks to Senator Norris and the other legislators that passed this through, we now have that tool.
I want to talk about the future a little bit. This is the third year of a Plough grant that created the Coordinated Response to Elder Abuse team. And clearly, every person I've ever talked to, is the third year that we've covered this on the show, every person I talked to has said that CREA is doing a good job, that it's worthwhile. But it is the third year, funding is running out. What happens next year, or the year after that, or the year after that?
Well, somebody somewhere is going to have to step up. Because again, we would not be in the situation that we are here in Shelby County. We are, I think, light years ahead of some of where the other jurisdictions are. And that's because of the vision and the leadership and the financial strength of the Plough Foundation and their generosity with their resources. But I really think the rest of the state saw what we were doing here through Plough and said we need to be doing this on a statewide level.
Is there an opportunity for funding for that?
There has to be. We have to make it available. We've done a great job in the last 7 years or so of sort of picking the low-hanging fruit, making some improvements, many improvements across the state. The next 4 to 8 years is we're going to have to be more creative, smarter in dealing really with preventive programs. And we're talking about that in healthcare, we're talking about it with youth, but we need to talk about it with senior citizens. So by talking about this and having the consciousness raising, providing some better tools, we hope that we're going to be able to get ahead of this curve a little bit and spend the money it takes to prevent more serious problems down the road. So that's what I'm talking about, and I'm optimistic, but we have to keep the focus on this important issue.
Well, let's look down the road even further into talking about the future, because right now, the 85 plus demographic is the largest, the fastest growing age demographic in the country. And we know that as the baby boomers age, we're facing a future where 20% of the population is going to be over age 65. That's a huge demographic shift. So what does the future look like regarding the fight against elder abuse, given those facts?
I hope it looks a lot like the progress that we've made in the arena of domestic violence. In the 26 years that I've been a prosecutor, we've all gotten better at making domestic violence cases, at prosecuting domestic violence cases. I hope that we make those same steps, and I think we're off to a much better start in the area of elder abuse. But it's got to be focused on making sure that we have the resources that we need, coupled with what Senator Norris has just mentioned. The public has to be part of this too. We can't do what we do every day down at 201 Poplar without the community being involved. If it's picking up the phone and calling APS, whatever it might be, looking out for one another, checking on your neighbors. Whether we've just had a storm or not, everybody needs to be checking on one another.
Do you sense an increased public awareness after 3 years of CREA?
Yes.
I think so.
I do.
Yeah.
And I'm very optimistic about it because, you know, we have to love and take care of our neighbors, and that's what it's all about.
All right, well, I want to thank all of you for being on The Best Times and talking about this important issue of fighting elder abuse. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Under Tennessee law, everyone is a mandatory reporter. If you suspect an older adult is being abused, call the Adult Protective Services hotline. In an emergency, always call 911 first. Want more information about life after 50? Go online to watch more shows and find more resources. And send us your feedback and story ideas to besttimes@wkno.org. That's all for this edition of The Best Times. Please join us next week for more stories about life after 50. Until then, I'm Cris Hardaway. Thanks for watching. Good night.